So that's when I kind of ended up chatting with someone on the subway. I was basically leaving work from Capital One, and Capital One used to be right on top of Union Station at that point. So I just ended up sitting next to someone, and he was doing something that looked like some data analysis. So I just started talking to him, and we had a pretty long conversation until I had to get off. We just exchanged contacts. I mean, I didn't really like think anything about it, but a couple of days later, he kind of messaged me and told me that, hey, he's planning to introduce me. He wants to introduce me to the director of data science, and they're looking to hire data scientists and staff of the team. So that was kind of this serendipitous like happening.
The goal of Career is a Journey series is to showcase two ideas. One, the range of roles available in the job market is very, very large. Two, Career is a journey with twists and turns.
Hi. Today we are talking to Vijay. I had reached out to Vijay as a stranger on LinkedIn when I was immigrating to Canada. He was very kind with his time and suggestions. You will hear today about one of his other conversation with a stranger on a subway which led him to landing his new role. He is also making the most of his company's remote or work from home policy. He is actually dialing in from Colombia for this conversation. Let's dive right in. Vijay, welcome to the series. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, excited to chat.
Thank you. So let's get you introduced. So, how would you describe your current role to a high schooler or someone who is doing his or her undergrad?
Oh, it's not the easiest thing, but so I work for a company that sells carbon credits. So a little bit tricky. I mean, I don't know how many people are kind of into the whole climate change and like climate change mitigation world. But one of the ways you can kind of take away carbon from the atmosphere is just by growing trees. So what we do is we work with partners who are into growing trees, and we essentially we have a technology solution that enables us to measure the amount of carbon that's stored in a certain plot of land, for example. So I work with so there's a lot of measurement and data analysis that comes in to make sure that like you can measure as accurately as possible the amount of carbon stored in a plot of land or in a project or things like that, because that is essentially what you're selling as a carbon credits. So I kind of help the engineering team with the data side of things. So it's very quantitative in some way, but ultimately the quantitative thing is to enable uh, kind of solutions to help mitigate the climate change problem. So I don't know if that's something someone will understand. It's a very complicated topic, and even I struggle to mostly explain this to people.
No, it definitely makes sense. So, carbon credit. Is your company like a marketplace that allows organizations to buy carbon credit, and on the other side, you uh, enable that by growing and planting trees?
No, we there's multiple roles in this carbon credit world. We kind of call ourselves a project developer. So we work with uh, project implementers, I think is the term for people who are on the ground working in parcels of land. So we work with specifically with farmers in Central America who own their land and want to kind of grow trees in certain subset of their land. So we kind of work with another organization that recruits the farmers, helps them with growing the trees, planting, all of that. But then we package that project and the carbon and sell it to other people who then we usually sell it to wholesalers. They will then sell it to companies or others who want to buy carbon credits. So we are kind of in the place where we we roughly have an idea of how much carbon credits we can sell or the kind of carbon credits that we want to sell. And we work with our partners to kind of enable that, develop that amount of carbon credits. So
Okay, yeah.
recruiting the land, all of those things. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's useful. So, do you have a typical day? Like, if someone were to shadow you for a
Yeah.
day, for a week, what would they see as your day to day or typical
Yeah.
typical activity?
I mean, they would pretty much see me kind of querying the database for a bunch of things and trying to slice and dice the data in various ways to present it. Sometimes, so that's what they'll mostly see. I would say 4 out of 5 days, they'll probably see me do that when I'm not in meetings, trying to figure out what to do. And then the other one day, they might see me actually working very closely with engineers on kind of like implementing some new algorithms, methods, or like basically new optimizations to do some of the automated calculations that we do. So you will see this kind of two things. So I would call that like the 1 out of 5 or 2 out of 5 would be more of the data sciencey part, where you work with engineering to develop some features, and the 3, 4 out of 5 is mostly around understanding our data and using that to ensure that the projects that we are working on are in a good state.
Okay, yeah,
So
that's
it's like somewhere between data analytics and data science.
Okay, yeah, got it. So I think that's a good segue to the next question, which is you have held data scientist position at 3 different organizations, and if you think about it, maybe at least 2 different industries. So one of the things that surprised me when I got into the corporate world was the fact that a software developer in company one is going to be different from what he or she will do when he moves to company 2. And now if they move industry, now again there is more number of changes within the same role. So when you moved between organization, was there a lot of overlap, a little bit of overlap? How would you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll maybe take a step back a little bit and like talk a little bit about why I chose data science post my PhD. So I realized during my PhD that too much specialization wasn't something that I enjoyed. I'm kind of a person who likes to dabble a little bit in a lot of things. I read a lot in kind of varied topics. So at that was kind of the time. So this was like taking back to 2014. That's when I was like about, or at least I thought I was about to graduate. It took me a couple more years to actually finish my PhD. But I was looking, okay, I know I don't want to stay in academia because it's too specialized. I don't get to work with people. So I was kind of looking at what else is out there for someone with my skills. And data science seemed to be this kind of all-encompassing field where you were in some sense a generalist problem solver, but maybe you had uh, a specialized set of tools. So it seemed interesting to me because I felt like, oh, you could specialize if you wanted, or you could stay generalist if you wanted, at least at that time. So, and even the title data scientist often kind of implies that an organization doesn't really know exactly what they're looking for, or they're kind of looking for a generalist who can do a lot of things. So that's kind of the step back. So when I switched to data science, this was in the back of my mind. At Capital One, I would say I started out doing mostly data analytics, so reporting, dashboarding, uh, some automation of tasks and things like that. And then I changed roles within the company to do a little bit more like what I thought I would do with with a physics PhD was like building machine learning models. So I did some of that in the fraud team at Capital One. But so, I mean, at that time, at least, I was kind of super more interested in like the machine learning, software engineering side of things because I thought that's kind of where my skill sets or like my previous experience could be very useful. So I was kind of thinking about moving out of Cap One because I felt like those kind of roles existed more in a software company and not in a company that was much more focused on the financial side of things. So it's like company structure matters. There are like set of things that you can or cannot do within an organization, or it's like very hard to do certain things. So just kind of being in a software team, doing that software development, seeing that software development life cycle wasn't something I felt I could get that experience in Capital One Canada. So I was thinking about it and maybe apply to a few places and not gone through the interview like fully gotten an offer. So that's when I kind of ended up chatting with someone on the subway. I was basically leaving work from Capital One, and Capital One used to be right on top of Union Station at that point. So I just ended up sitting next to someone, and he was doing something that looked like some data analysis. So I just started talking to him, and we had a pretty long conversation until I had to get off. We just exchanged contacts. I mean, I didn't really like think anything about it, but a couple of days later, he kind of messaged me and told me that, hey, he's planning to introduce me. He wants to introduce me to the director of data science, and they're looking to hire data scientists and staff of the team. So that was kind of this serendipitous like happening or whatever serendipity that then like I found that PagerDuty at that time was kind of the right organization for me because they were starting a new data science team, but they wanted to build product features using data science machine learning. And the product itself was very somewhat complex and interesting. So so I got through the interview process and then I switched and I realized that yeah, I mean like the first 2.5 years I think were great for me. Uh, but then and I had a very good relationship with my first manager. But then she left and things kind of changed. But I felt like it was a very different kind of data science because I wasn't doing anything uh, to anything in the reporting side of things. I was mostly looking at our data, working with product managers, engineers to try and build new features that our customers would want based on data science machine learning. So it was like a little bit of R&D, a little bit of working in product teams to like change things, or like we already had some features launched, like update them, a whole bunch of things. But I think the interesting part was yeah, I hadn't really worked in an engineering team before, so that was very useful for me. And then I also got to work with some really good data scientists who I learned a lot from, especially from this side of things of like, oh, how do you take an idea and then get it as a product and launch it? I learned a lot from the principal data scientist on our team on basically how to think about doing that. So that was a great role. But then things changed, COVID hit, company directions was changing a little bit, and I did get something launched. I had one idea that I kind of worked on a little bit, found some research papers, and got it launched as a product feature. So at that time, I felt like, oh, I maybe had like finished the cycle, and I was kind of looking for a change essentially, or like feeling like I needed a change. But like I said before the call, my personal life was also undergoing some changes at that time. So I waited a little bit. But then at the end of 2021, I decided that, okay, it's time for me to look for something new to do. At that time, I didn't really know exactly what it was, but I think I was looking to work more directly on the climate change problem, and I didn't know exactly where. So I started talking to my friends who were in like related areas and things like that. But I also took 6 months off just to chill, read, do some other things that were interesting for me. Uh, yeah, I volunteered a little bit. I had side gigs that paid me some money related to cycling. Uh, yeah, but then I like at the end, like around like the 5-ish month mark, maybe 4.5, I was like thinking, okay, maybe it's time for me to look for another job, but I wanted it to be in the environmental space. And I found this opening on one of the Slack communities that it's called Work on Climate. And it's basically for people who are looking to find a climate related job. And it seemed really interesting and exactly the kind of organization and role that I wanted. Very generalist. Like we are basically a team of 3 data people, or we will be a team of 3 data people come end of April. So one of them is my boss who leads the data science team and the product team, and myself right now. And we'll get another data analyst starting soon. So very generalist, very much also very small company. Another thing I wanted to change was I'd been going in this direction of 1,000 people company, uh, maybe 500-ish when I joined PagerDuty, which grew to 1,000 by the time I left. And so I wanted to see something much smaller. So I joined this company called Taking Root, and I think there were maybe 30 people or like around there, and they're still maybe not that much beyond 30 at this point. So yeah, so I think it was just kind of different things at different places. And at a 30% company, you do a lot more. You have to be a lot more hands-on and be ready to deal with whatever comes your way, because essentially like processes and things are still being figured out, and most of them are maybe sometimes figured out by you when it comes to data. So yeah, I don't know if that paints a rough picture of how I've been thinking about it, and yeah, how I
No,
made these changes. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. I think it does. So I found the difference between small organizations and big organizations also very interesting. And I think, or my personal hypothesis is also that generalists fit better in a smaller organization because, like you said, if you want to drive a project to success, uh, you become the sales person selling that idea all the way to training the customer and then maybe even supporting them. So you become all the way from a salesperson, a product developer, software developer, implementation consultant, project manager, and finally a customer support team member. So that is interesting. So I captured a couple of interesting themes that I wanted to probe a little bit more. So one of the things that you mentioned is at Capital One, you moved between teams.
Yeah.
So I find that also as a useful tool that an employer, an individual have to explore more. So if you don't like, it's not that if you don't like, if you want to try out new things, you don't immediately have to change company or change industry or change geography. You can always explore more within the same company. So there are, of course, pros and cons. How was that process for you? I know different companies have different policies, but how did you go through that switch?
Yeah, so Capital One is a company where that's actually very, very common. So in fact, I think for a lot of people, they hire from campus. And even though I had finished a PhD, I was kind of part of their campus hire program, or like put in that cohort. So one of the things is like roughly every 18 months, you can have that conversation and think about making a change. And essentially, like the way Capital One data science at least works is like it's its own org, but the people in the org work with different lines of business. So they're kind of embedded in different teams. So when you say you want to change, depending on what's available, you could basically like hand over your role to someone and then move into another team as the embedded data scientist. So it's pretty common. It roughly happens like every 2 years. You kind of start the conversation maybe at the 18-month mark or so. For myself, I kind of felt that the first role was not a great fit very early on, but my manager was very supportive. So so I kind of stayed in that role, but I had 2 managers, one in the line of business and one as like a data science manager. They were both very supportive. So I think like I had started those conversations pretty early on. And then at some point after my 1 year came about, uh, there's some opportunities opened up in a team that I was really interested in joining. So I asked for that change, and then they kind of made it happen because both my line manager and my data science manager were pretty happy with me at that point. So part of it is kind of like, I guess if you're performing well, then the organization has the incentive to keep you happier in a different place in the organization rather than kind of telling you to stay in a role that maybe you're outgrowing a little bit and like run the risk of you leaving the company altogether. So Capital One does a very good job. There are a lot of people who stay there for years and years because you keep getting to try new roles, new even like people even change from data science to very rare, but people have changed from data science to something like product management, things like that. So it's pretty common for that to happen in the company.
Okay, yeah, yeah, very nice. Um, Another theme, and I think you mentioned that in this response as well, which is the benefit of having a good manager. I think the saying goes something like, you don't leave a company, you leave a manager. So
Yeah.
some amount of pressure on the managers to be good, but if you have to, you also mentioned how the manager at PagerDuty was great. So can you name, say, 2 or 3 characteristics of a good manager that you have seen in your career?
It's Yeah, I don't know if I can like easily place 2 or 3, but I think the thing I really liked about working with my manager at PagerDuty was that she really kind of understood what people enjoyed, what kind of tasks and projects people would really enjoy. So she kind of had that relationship with you to like know you a little bit outside of work, what kind of person you are, and then kind of put you in projects where you could maybe exercise some muscles outside of. For me, I think it was more like I liked kind of getting into products earlier in the process when there was more like an ideation phase. I was maybe less of a like if a problem is really framed well, like executed really quickly person. So I think like we over time, however, I don't know, but like we figured this out. She knew this about me, and I got a bunch of projects that kind of suited that that aspect for me. So I think that was like one thing that I would say is like maybe understanding a little bit about what intrinsically motivates your team members and maybe trying to align that with organizational needs at that point in time. It's a lot of a matching problem. I think of it as a matching problem,
Mm.
especially if you have a big enough team. If you don't have a big enough team, then it's kind of hard because you have your priorities and you have to execute on them. And you might have to kind of maybe, like give people projects that they may not be so excited about. But if you have a big enough team and a big enough organization, then maybe you can do a little bit more of that matching. So at least this is my perspective of what worked for me. But I don't know. I haven't really talked to her about like how that worked from her side.
Okay, no, that's very useful. So that's one advantage of a big organization that I had not considered earlier. In that, because you have more number of projects and because you have a bigger team, now you can assign team members according to their to what intrinsically motivates them. So thanks for that. Okay, so moving on, maybe jamming a bit here.
Mm-hmm.
So the career advice that you would give to your younger self. So one is to trust your gut instinct. The other one was,
Yeah.
it is not terribly difficult to change courses in your career. So I think you covered about how you've changed career and what drove those changes.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything more to it to add?
No, I think the only thing is that uh, so it's a little bit easier. It was a little bit easier for me to make the shift to an environmental organization after taking a 6 month break, because I had experience in like reasonably well-known companies, and I had the financial cushion to do it. I really didn't have that when I finished my PhD. So at that point, I was definitely kind of looking for any role that was kind of like data science related, just so I could get a start. So I think part of it is that like the change, making a change uh, gets both easier and harder. And I would say it gets easier in the sense of you have a lot more skills and a financial cushion, but harder also in the same way, because like a lot of, at least I had this mindset maybe a little bit that, you should be kind of, as you're growing in your career, you should be maybe making a little bit more money every year than you were making before. But one of the things that, like, I took a 6 month sabbatical and I really enjoyed that. And one of the things that I decided to change was I kind of switched my optimization criteria a little bit. I wanted a fully remote job to do what I'm doing right now, which is traveling South America for 5 months. And I was willing, and also I wanted to work in an organization that was doing environmental or like aligned projects. But I was okay with taking a salary cut uh, to be able to do that, as long as it met like some minimum criteria. So I think it's like I don't know how it will play out in the long run, but I felt like it was a risk that I could afford to take. And if things didn't work out, then I could always kind of go back and maybe find a job at a slightly bigger organization that pays me a little bit more. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say. It depends on like other life circumstances, finances, relationships, health, and like how much of an ability to kind of take on some risk you have from all of those dimensions.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. There is this book, I think it's called Second Mountain. The idea is when you start off your career, you follow what's the most easily available or directly in front of you. The direction is pretty much set for you. So you climb that mountain at the peak, you realize that, okay, no, this is not the mountain that I wanted to climb. Now let me figure out which of these mountains should I climb. So you set up, like you said, your own priorities, whether it is financial, relationship, travel, skills. So you think about what you want in your life, what you want in your professional life, and then that helps you dictate where you take your career. So it's very cool that you've been able to do that. And I think one of the interesting takeaways is like have some sort of a prioritization metrics. What do you want to optimize for? Good stuff there.
So and it's also like a very machine learning thing, hill climbing, right? And you can't, like, you need to kind of go down to find a better optimum for you sometimes. So I just want to point that out.
Local maxima versus universal maxima, right? Okay. Yeah. So another interesting point that you raised is that having a full remote role was important to you. I wrote about the future of work, and remote work is like one of the anchor point of the future of work. Now, so you mentioned how you were traveling. Like, can you give us some additional context? Hey, how many countries did you visit? What was something that surprised you? What was something that you loved?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll take the easy ones. So I didn't want to visit too many countries. Like my plan initially was to I like being in a city or a place for a little bit longer time so that I feel like I know this place. And I got a chance. So I went first to Buenos Aires. And so I was there like November until like mid-December. And then I came back like late January. So I went there. I was there for 6 weeks. Then I went to a few other places in Argentina. I had time off. So I actually went to the Patagonia region in Argentina just to like hike and explore. That's something that I'd always wanted to do. Uh, Come see the mountains in Argentina. So I did that. Then I spent some time in like another small town in Argentina, a little bit of time in Santiago, Chile. Then I went to Brazil because I wanted to catch a flight to India, and that was the best airport to do that. And it was also the time for the carnival in Sao Paulo. So I went there, and then I knew that I had to get back to Canada for a company event end of April. So I had, I think, one other country left. And after talking to a lot of people, I settled on Colombia. One, it was a bit closer to Canada. Two, I've heard that it has the nicest people, and it's mostly been true for me. Everyone I've interacted with. I've only been here 2 weeks. Yeah, so that's kind of been my journey. What is surprising? Uh, is I don't know if there's anything that's really surprised me. I think one thing I would say that I noticed a lot in Argentina is that the culture is very collective. And I was there during the World Cup and when they were winning. So you would see a lot of things where uh so for example, they would celebrate by climbing up on top of this. Like they had these big bus stands near their obelisco is what they call it. That's where they go after every game to celebrate. And then you would see this kind of huge collective behavior where people would help other people get on top of that roof of the bus stand. And it was like basically an engine of people. You would get lifted up, somebody would like hold you up, hold your hands from up there, and then like two other people will try and catch your legs and pull you up. So you would basically get pulled up by others, and then when you're going down a similar thing would happen. So there are a lot of these things that maybe you don't see as much in North America, but I think you see this a lot more in, like in India, I think you would see quite a bit of this. And in Latin America, I feel like you see quite a bit of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So just like more of a collective culture. And yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I guess
Yeah.
uh, one
Maybe
other
one more
perspective.
thing that surprised me since I already spoke about the World Cup is that I'd never really been to a country where everything shuts down when a football game is on. But Argentina is like that. There will not be any shops open. The shops will be open, but it's just so that they can use the TV to watch the game.
Okay,
But everything will shut down. So it's
okay.
just empty streets. Yeah. That was
No,
definitely something, yeah, that I didn't imagine would happen.
okay. Um, I don't suppose you see that level of cricket fever in India, or do we?
Well, I think maybe I don't know now because I haven't experienced a big cricket game in India. But the closest I would say is like back, and this is going to date me, but there was this India Pakistan World Cup match in 1996 that I remember. It was one of the first World Cups that I was really into. So I remember that game was kind of like that, where everyone was in front of their TV or their neighbor's TV and just watching the game. But in Argentina, it's every football game, and
Okay,
it doesn't matter whether you're rich, poor, whatever, everyone is just watching the game.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Soccer
So
is a
it's,
religion almost.
yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you have say converted the remote or work from home concept to work from anywhere. Is this something that we are planning to extend for the next 1 year, or you're like, okay, I've seen enough countries, now I'm going to go back home?
I don't know yet because I think what I am planning to do is spend the next summer at least in Canada, but I don't really have a place now. And I was planning to be in Vancouver for a while. And I thought after that, after being in a place, so I think the longest I've been in this journey is 6 weeks, and that was my first stop. So I do get, it does get a little bit hard transitioning from one place to the other because you need to kind of figure out everything else again in a new place. Uh, so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to take it slow, because it can get pretty jarring. But I also feel like there is so much more to see even in South America. which is what the constraints of my current job allow me, that I do want to come back, but I don't know. I have to go back and see how everything else works out. Because one of the things I haven't figured out, which is very mundane, is like I probably need to find someone to tell me how taxes work if I'm not in Canada for a whole year. For example, I've never figured that out. So things like that, I need to figure out if I want to do this more. But yeah, but part of me is also like, I need to first settle and be in a place for a while to maybe get into a different mind space, and then kind of ask myself this question, okay, would I want to do this again? Yeah, so I don't know the answer. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm being open to whatever I feel like maybe at the end of the summer. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sure more exciting adventures await. So
hope
now
so.
I want to I want to come back to another theme that I think
Mhm.
I see repeatedly. So one, you talked about how you landed your job at PagerDuty because you talked to a stranger. I saw on your LinkedIn profile how you have this curiosity conversations up on your calendar.
Yeah.
So I think there is some research showing how talking to a stranger when you are at the airport or when you're out in the street generally is a good thing, increases your net happiness. But then growing up, we are all taught to be wary of strangers, stranger danger, and all that. So, is talking to strangers something that you got good at? You wanted to practice that more. How did that uh,
I wouldn't
become
say I'm really
a
good at
habit?
it.
Okay.
Like I kind of am a little bit of an introvert, but if I feel like there is something interesting that the other person is doing, that kind of changes my calculus a little bit. Like if I know nothing about them, I feel like I'm at a loss how to start a conversation. I know there are people who can just walk up to someone and do that. I typically don't have those conversations. But if I see someone is reading a book that I've read or is on their computer doing something, then I feel less uh, inhibited to start a conversation. And honestly, yeah, I don't think I've had any real bad experiences by talking to strangers. And I think this kind of like working remotely, traveling, I think puts me in that space a lot more where I really don't know anyone and I have to strike up a conversation. So I did do that today with someone at my co-working space because they were on a call like a few seats away from me and they were talking about sustainability and tree planting, and which is kind of like some related to what my organization does. So we had a good conversation and we are probably going to catch up tomorrow a little bit more in detail. So it's kind of like, oh, if there is something in common that I
Nice.
feel like would be a good conversation, then I don't feel uh, that, it's like I think the stranger danger calculus has changed already by that point. Yeah.
Yeah,
The
absolutely. Like,
curiosity conversations, just to touch on that, I think it was something I found uh, when I was like trying to, it's like this guy called Paul Millard. I don't know if he found it somewhere else, but he talks a lot about becoming an independent worker, which is something I explored, but maybe I felt like I wasn't ready for it. But he kind of talked about this, and that's when I thought, okay, I'll try this and put it up on my LinkedIn. But I think maybe I've had three of them so far or four, and they've mostly been people I already know from beforehand who just use that as a low effort, low barrier way to kind of set up a time to chat with me. So I haven't really had more than two with people I don't actually know. So it's not been a big success. I think it's been around. I've had it for a year, so I haven't even had one in a month. So yeah, it's it's there, and we'll see how it changes. Yeah,
no, of course. So, uh, seeing that on your LinkedIn made it marginally easier for me to reach out. So, for what it's worth, it was valuable
yeah,
to me in
yeah,
reducing my inhibition about like reaching out. So, I loved it.
Okay, so that's good to hear. So that's kind of what I want to do, is hoping that even people who don't really know me, if they find something interesting on my profile and want to like chat with me, then they can easily do it. And it's now syncs to my work calendar. So hopefully even the timings will, I don't have to worry about it.
Okay, Vijay, so it's been great to have you respond to all of my questions. Great conversation. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for inviting me. And yeah, looking forward to seeing your career as a journey grow much bigger.
Yeah, thank you, Vijay.
See you.
Like, share, and subscribe.